A wealthy woman was trapped inside an overturned SUV as icy river water slowly filled the vehicle. Her seatbelt was stuck, nobody was around. She screamed for help, but the snowstorm drowned out her voice. Just when she thought she was going to die, she saw something unbelievable. Running through the snow toward her was a 12-year-old homeless boy. What happened next would not only save her life, it would change both of their lives forever. 3 years before that snowy night, Caleb Turner lived in a modest apartment on the edge of the city with his parents. The apartment was small. The furniture was old. The walls needed repainting. But to Caleb, it felt like the safest place in the world. Every morning, his mother would wake him up for school. Every evening, his father would return home from the repair shop with grease on his hands and a smile on his face. Life wasn't perfect. Money was often tight. But there was always laughter in the apartment. And there was always love. At 9 years old, Caleb never worried about where he would sleep. He never worried about food. He never worried about being alone. Because his parents made him feel protected. His father, Michael Turner, worked long hours as a mechanic. His mother, Sarah Turner, worked part-time at a neighborhood grocery store. Neither of them earned much money. Yet somehow they always found a way to make Caleb feel rich. Not rich in money. Rich in love. On weekends, the family would walk through the city park together. Sometimes they bought ice cream. Sometimes they fed birds by the lake. Sometimes they simply sat together and talked about their dreams. Those moments became Caleb's favorite memories. He didn't know it then. But one day, those memories would be all he had left. As winter approached that year, life seemed normal. School. Dinner. Family time. The same routines he had always known. Then came the night that changed everything. A bitter wind rattled the windows of the apartment building. Most families were asleep. The city was quiet. Caleb had already gone to bed. Sometime after midnight, a strange smell drifted through the apartment. Smoke. At first it was faint. Then it became stronger. A few moments later, shouting erupted from the hallway. Doors slammed open. People screamed. And suddenly the fire alarms began blaring throughout the building. Caleb woke up in confusion. His heart pounded as his father rushed into his room. "Caleb, get up, we have to go." Fear filled his father's voice. The kind of fear Caleb had never heard before. Within minutes, smoke was pouring through the apartment. The hallway outside had become a wall of gray darkness. People were running. Children were crying. Neighbors were calling for help. Everything happened so fast. Too fast. Michael grabbed Caleb's hand. Sarah stayed close behind them. Together they tried to reach the emergency exit. But the fire was spreading rapidly. The heat grew stronger. The smoke became thicker. Breathing became harder. Then, through the chaos, firefighters finally reached their floor. One firefighter spotted Caleb. What happened next would remain burned into his memory forever. His father pushed him toward safety. His mother screamed his name. And then the smoke separated them. Those were the last moments Caleb ever saw his parents. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying in a hospital bed. The room felt unfamiliar. Machines beeped softly nearby. His throat hurt. His body felt weak. For a moment, he believed everything had been a nightmare. Then he looked around. His parents weren't there. Hours later, a nurse gently sat beside him. She didn't need to say much. The sadness in her eyes told him everything. His parents were gone. Both of them. In a single night, Caleb lost his home. He lost his family. And he lost the future he thought he would have. The funeral came and went. Friends offered sympathy. Neighbors promised support. People told him he would be okay. But, as the weeks turned into months, life moved on for everyone else. And Caleb was left behind. One by one, the phone calls stopped. The visits became less frequent. The promises slowly disappeared. Soon, Caleb found himself moving between temporary shelters and overcrowded housing programs. Some places were full. Some places felt unsafe. Some nights there wasn't even a bed available. For the first time in his life, Caleb understood what loneliness truly felt like. Yet despite everything, he refused to hate the world. He remembered something his mother used to tell him. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change someone's life. Those words stayed with him. Even when he was hungry. Even when he was cold. Even when people walked past him without noticing he existed. As the years passed, Caleb learned how to survive. He collected bottles. Returned cans for a few dollars. Carried groceries for strangers. Did small jobs whenever he could. Anything to earn enough money for food. Anything to survive another day. By the age of 12, the streets had become the only home he knew. And as another harsh winter arrived, life became even harder. The nights grew colder. The snow arrived earlier. And every evening became a battle against freezing temperatures. Caleb didn't know it yet. But somewhere across the city, fate was already moving. And before the end of the coming week, a snowstorm, a billionaire woman, and one life-changing decision would bring two completely different worlds together. While Caleb fought to survive on the streets, another battle was being fought on the other side of the city. Unlike Caleb's battle, it wasn't a battle against hunger. Or cold. Or loneliness. It was a battle against heartbreak. Inside one of the most luxurious neighborhoods in the city stood the Whitmore estate. The mansion was enormous. Beautiful gardens surrounded the property. Luxury vehicles lined the driveway. Everything about the estate spoke of success. Yet behind those gates lived two people who would have traded much of their wealth for something money could never buy. A child. Eleanor Whitmore sat quietly in her office, staring through the large glass windows at the city below. At 40 years old, she was one of the most respected businesswomen in the country. She had built companies. Created jobs. Earned millions. People often looked at her life and assumed she had everything. They were wrong. The one thing she wanted most had always remained out of reach. A family. Across town, her husband Jonathan Whitmore was finishing work at his corporate headquarters. At 43, Jonathan was known for being calm and disciplined. But even he couldn't hide the disappointment he felt every time another medical treatment failed. For years, he and Eleanor had hoped for a child. For years, doctors had given them hope. And for years, that hope had ended in heartbreak. That evening, Jonathan returned home earlier than usual. When Eleanor arrived later, he was waiting for her in the dining room. Dinner was already prepared. But neither of them seemed hungry. They spoke about work. About business. About everyday things. Yet both of them avoided discussing the emptiness they felt. After dinner, Eleanor wandered through the mansion. Eventually she stopped outside a room near the end of the hallway. A room that had remained untouched for years. The nursery. The walls had been painted. The furniture had been assembled. Everything had been prepared. Everything except the child who was supposed to live there. Eleanor stood in the doorway for several moments. Then quietly closed the door. Jonathan watched from the hallway. He didn't need to ask what she was thinking. He already knew. The silence between them said enough. Outside, snow began falling. At first, only a few flakes. Then more. The weather forecast had warned about an approaching winter storm. Most people planned to stay home. Most people planned to avoid traveling. But the following day was one of the busiest days Eleanor had faced all month. The next morning arrived beneath gray skies. Caleb woke up beneath the overpass, shivering beneath a worn blanket. The freezing air bit at his skin. He rubbed his hands together, trying to stay warm. Nearby, cars rushed past overhead. Most drivers never noticed the boy below them. To the city, he was invisible. To Caleb, it was just another day. He spent the morning collecting bottles and cans. By afternoon, snow covered the sidewalks. Business owners hurried to close early. Pedestrians disappeared from the streets. Everyone wanted to get home before the storm became dangerous. Everyone except Caleb. Because he had nowhere to go. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained at work longer than expected. A major meeting stretched into the evening. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow whipped through the city. Road conditions worsened. Employees began leaving the office. One by one, the floors emptied. By the time Eleanor finally gathered her things, the building was nearly deserted. She glanced at her phone. A message from Jonathan appeared. "Roads are getting bad, please be careful." A small smile crossed her face. She replied, "I'll be home soon." Those would be the last words she sent before the accident. Across the city, Caleb searched for shelter. The storm had become brutal. The wind felt like ice against his face. Even under the overpass, the cold seemed impossible to escape. As night fell, he wrapped himself tightly in his blanket and tried to rest. For a while, the only sounds were the wind and distant traffic. Then it happened. A loud screech shattered the night. Tires sliding across ice. A horn blasting. Metal crashing against metal. And then, silence. Caleb's eyes flew open. His heart began racing. For a moment, he wasn't sure what he had heard. Then another sound reached him. A faint cry for help. Somewhere in the darkness. Somewhere beyond the snowstorm. Caleb slowly stood. The wind howled around him. The cry came again. Weak. Desperate. Someone was in trouble. And without realizing it, Caleb had just taken the first step toward the moment that would change his life forever. The cry for help came again. Weak. Desperate. Barely audible beneath the roar of the storm. Caleb stood frozen for a moment. His heart pounded inside his chest. Most people would have stayed where they were. Most people would have waited for emergency services. Most people would have assumed someone else would help. But Caleb knew what it felt like to be alone. He knew what it felt like to wait for help that never came. And something inside him refused to ignore that voice. Pulling his thin jacket tighter around his body, Caleb stepped into the storm. The freezing wind immediately struck his face. Snow swirled around him. Visibility was terrible. The streets were almost empty. The cry came again. This time it sounded closer. Caleb began running. His worn shoes slipped against the icy pavement. Several times he nearly fell. But he kept moving. The further he ran, the louder the storm seemed to become. Then he saw it. At first it looked like flashing lights reflecting through the snow. Then he saw twisted metal. A vehicle. A large black SUV. The front end had smashed through a roadside barrier. Part of the vehicle hung dangerously near an icy river below. Steam rose from the damaged engine. One of the headlights flickered weakly. For a moment, Caleb simply stared. He had never seen a vehicle like that before. It looked expensive. The kind of vehicle driven by people who lived in a completely different world from his. Then he heard a scream. And suddenly none of that mattered. Someone was trapped inside. Caleb rushed forward. As he approached, he could see movement behind the shattered glass. A woman. She was struggling. Panic filled her face. Water from the river was pouring into the damaged vehicle. The SUV had landed at an angle. Every passing second allowed more freezing water inside. The woman was running out of time. Inside the vehicle, Eleanor Whitmore fought to stay calm. Her head hurt. Her shoulder burned with pain. Everything had happened so quickly. One moment she had been driving home. The next, the vehicle had lost traction on the ice. She remembered the tires sliding. The steering wheel jerking. The terrifying impact. Then darkness. Now she was trapped. The seatbelt wouldn't release. The door wouldn't open. And the icy water continued rising. She had never felt fear like this before. For the first time in many years, Eleanor truly believed she might die. Then she noticed movement outside. A small figure running through the snow. At first she thought she was imagining it. Then she realized someone was actually there. A boy. Just a boy. Caleb reached the driver's side window. The glass was badly damaged but still holding together. "Can you hear me?" he shouted. Eleanor nodded desperately. "Please help me." Her voice trembled. Caleb looked around frantically. He needed something. Anything. His eyes landed on a heavy piece of broken metal lying near the barrier. He grabbed it. The metal felt ice cold in his hands. Taking a deep breath, he swung it against the window. Crack. The glass fractured. But it didn't break. Caleb hit it again. Crack. More fractures spread across the surface. The water inside continued rising. Eleanor's breathing became faster. Caleb swung a third time. The window finally shattered. Cold water splashed outward. Without hesitation, Caleb reached inside. Broken glass scraped against his hands. He ignored the pain. His focus remained on Eleanor. The seatbelt was stuck. He pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder. Still nothing. The water was now nearly at Eleanor's chest. Panic filled her eyes. For a brief second, Caleb remembered the night of the fire. The smoke. The fear. The helpless feeling of watching everything disappear. He remembered wishing someone would save the people he loved. That memory gave him strength. Gripping the buckle with both hands, he yanked as hard as he could. Click. The seatbelt released. Eleanor gasped. "Come on," Caleb shouted. Together they struggled toward the broken window. The freezing water made every movement difficult. Eleanor's injured shoulders slowed her down. Twice she slipped. Twice Caleb pulled her forward. Finally, they emerged from the vehicle. The storm continued raging around them. Caleb wrapped an arm around Eleanor and helped her move away from the edge of the river. Step by step, slowly, carefully, several yards away, they collapsed onto the snow-covered ground. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. They simply lay there, breathing heavily. Alive. Eleanor turned toward the boy. Snowflakes covered his hair. His clothes were soaked. His hands were bleeding from the broken glass. Yet he seemed more concerned about her than himself. "You saved me," Eleanor whispered. Caleb looked away. "Are you okay?" The question surprised her. Most people would have been thinking about rewards. Or recognition. Or money. But this boy only wanted to know if she was safe. Before Eleanor could answer, distant sirens echoed through the storm. Someone had reported the crash. Help was finally on the way. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights appeared through the snow. Police vehicles arrived first. Then firefighters. Then ambulances. Emergency crews rushed toward the scene. Paramedics immediately began examining Eleanor. A firefighter wrapped a warm blanket around Caleb's shoulders. Only then did everyone realize something remarkable. The person who had rescued Eleanor Whitmore wasn't a trained rescuer. Wasn't a police officer. Wasn't a firefighter. He was just a homeless 12-year-old boy standing alone in the snow. And neither Caleb nor Eleanor realized it yet. But the events of this night were only the beginning. Because while doctors prepared to take Eleanor to the hospital, a phone call was already being made to her husband. A phone call that would change everything. While ambulances raced through the snow-covered streets, Jonathan Whitmore sat alone in his office reviewing reports. Outside, the storm continued to grow worse. Most employees had already gone home. The building was nearly empty. Then his phone rang. Jonathan glanced at the screen. The call was coming from a hospital. Immediately, a feeling of unease settled in his chest. He answered. Within seconds, his expression changed. "What happened?" he asked. The nurse calmly explained that Eleanor had been involved in a serious vehicle accident. She was alive. She was conscious. But she had been transported to the hospital for treatment. Jonathan didn't ask another question. He grabbed his coat and left immediately. Less than 30 minutes later, he rushed through the hospital doors. Doctors explained that Eleanor had suffered a concussion, several cuts, bruises, and a shoulder injury. But thanks to the person who rescued her, she was expected to recover. Jonathan entered her room. The moment Eleanor saw him, relief filled her face. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Jonathan simply held her hand. Finally, he asked the question that had been haunting him since the phone call. "What happened?" Eleanor slowly explained everything. The storm. The icy road. The crash. The freezing water. Then she spoke about the boy. "The boy?" Jonathan asked. Eleanor nodded. "He saved my life." Jonathan frowned slightly. "Who was he?" Eleanor looked down. "I don't know." The answer surprised him. The person who had saved his wife was a complete stranger. A child. And neither of them even knew his name. Meanwhile, in another section of the hospital, doctors were examining Caleb. For the first time in years, he sat in a warm room. A nurse handed him a hot meal. Caleb stared at the food for a moment. Then quietly began eating. The doctors noticed how thin he was. How exhausted he looked. How worn out his clothes had become. One nurse gently asked where his family was. Caleb lowered his eyes. "I don't have one." The room became silent. Later that night, Eleanor asked a nurse if she could meet the boy. Jonathan wanted to thank him too. The nurse smiled. "I'll go find him." A few minutes later, she returned. Her expression had changed. "He isn't there." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. The nurse looked confused. "He left." Jonathan and Eleanor exchanged a glance. The blanket was still on the chair. Part of his meal remained untouched. But Caleb was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. No request for money. Nothing. He had simply disappeared. Back into the city. Back into the life he knew. The next morning, Caleb was once again beneath the overpass. As if nothing had happened. The city moved on. The accident made local news for a few days. People talked about it. Then they forgot. But Eleanor and Jonathan didn't. They couldn't. Again and again, Eleanor found herself wondering about the boy. Where was he sleeping? Was he safe? Had he eaten? Did anyone care about him? Weeks passed. Then months. Jonathan hired people to search for him. Private investigators followed leads. Charities were contacted. Shelters were visited. But nobody could find Caleb. It was as though he had vanished. Eventually, life continued. The years passed. Caleb grew older. The small homeless boy slowly became a young man. The struggles never completely disappeared. But he refused to give up. He worked whenever opportunities appeared. He studied whenever he could. And despite everything life had taken from him, he remained kind. Meanwhile, Eleanor never stopped thinking about the child who had saved her life. Every winter, when snow began falling, she remembered that night. She remembered the freezing water. And she remembered the boy who had appeared from the darkness. Then, nearly 6 years after the accident, something unexpected happened. Eleanor and Jonathan attended a charity event supporting disadvantaged youth. The ballroom was filled with guests, business leaders, community organizations, volunteers. As Eleanor listened to one of the speakers, her attention suddenly shifted. Across the room stood a young man. Something about him felt familiar. Very familiar. She couldn't explain it, but she knew she had seen him before. The young man turned slightly. And in that instant, Eleanor froze. The eyes. She recognized the eyes. Her heart began racing. It couldn't be. Could it? Slowly, she walked toward him. Jonathan followed. The young man looked up as they approached. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor asked softly, "Caleb?" The young man's eyes widened. Years had passed. But he recognized her immediately. The room seemed to disappear around them. The memories returned all at once. The storm. The crash. The rescue. The hospital. Everything. A smile slowly appeared on Caleb's face. "You remember me?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "How could I ever forget you?" For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Jonathan stepped forward. For years, he had imagined meeting the boy who saved his wife's life. Now he finally stood before him. Jonathan extended his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for bringing my wife back to me." Caleb didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. That evening, they talked for hours. For the first time, Eleanor and Jonathan learned the full story of Caleb's life. His parents. The fire. The years on the streets. The struggles. The loneliness. By the end of the conversation, there wasn't a dry eye at the table. What began as gratitude slowly became something much deeper. A friendship. A bond. A connection neither side had expected. And over time, Caleb became part of their lives. Not because of money. Not because of obligation. But because they genuinely cared for one another. The homeless boy who once believed he had no family discovered that family can sometimes arrive in unexpected ways. And the couple who spent years longing for a child finally found someone they loved as their own. All because one frightened boy chose to run toward danger when everyone else would have run away. Because sometimes, a single act of kindness can change a life. And sometimes, it can change several. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to this channel so that you will be notified when we drop the next one.